The courtroom was silent enough to hear the scratch of the judge's pen as he prepared to sign the divorce papers, papers that would strip Amara of the life she helped build and hand it to the woman her billionaire husband claimed to love now. Cameras flashed behind her, capturing the humiliation of a wife the world had already decided was disposable. Across the aisle, Damon sat stone-faced beside the younger woman who twisted her diamond bracelet as though already practicing her new role. Everyone expected Amara to break, to accept her fate with quiet dignity. Instead, she reached into her leather portfolio and slid a single document across the table, one bearing Damon's unmistakable signature and a clause no one in the room saw coming. What truth lay hidden in that forgotten prenup? Truth powerful enough to stop a judge's pen mid-stroke. Morning light drifted through the sheer curtains like a secret trying to reveal itself. But Amara felt it before she saw it. The quiet shift in the house that told her something in her life had already begun to slip away. The Harrington estate was as beautiful as ever, polished and serene, yet an uneasy stillness clung to the air, the kind that makes a person hold their breath without realizing it. She paused at the foot of the staircase, listening to the faint hum of the staff preparing breakfast. Their voices were softer than usual, their steps cautious, as though afraid any sound might crack the delicate peace she was struggling to maintain. She stepped into the kitchen with a warm smile, hoping to anchor herself in routine. But even the staff's polite greetings carried a tremor beneath the surface. They had seen the headlines, the whispers, the grainy photos of Damon leaving a gala without her. They didn't dare ask questions, but their sidelong glances filled the spaces between their words. Amara thanked them and carried her tea to the terrace. The porcelain felt warm against her palms, grounding her, calming her heartbeat. Yet as she looked out over the sprawling garden, she could feel the distance between her and Damon stretching wider than the trimmed hedges and marble fountains. It hadn't always been this way. She used to hear him before she saw him, his laughter rounding the corner, his keys jangling as he rushed to tell her some new idea he couldn't wait to share. Now, whole days passed without more than a few words exchanged. By noon, the estate filled with the quiet bustle of a workday. Assistants arrived, gardeners trimmed hedges, and deliveries came and went, each person performing their role as though on a carefully rehearsed stage. But Amara noticed how they skirted around her, offering smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The world outside already sensed the marriage bending, maybe even breaking, before she allowed herself to admit it. Late evening arrived before Damon did. The front door opened with the soft click she knew by heart, followed by the subtle shuffle of his coat being slipped off by the butler. Amara stood in the hallway, waiting, rehearsing something simple. How was your day? Hoping the normalcy might pull them back to steady ground. He appeared at the edge of the dimly lit foyer, handsome in a sharp suit, tired in a way exhaustion alone couldn't explain. When he leaned in to kiss her cheek, the faint scent of floral perfume rose between them, delicate yet unmistakable, not hers. She tried to smile through the knot tightening in her throat. "Long day?" she asked. "Client dinner," he replied quickly, already loosening his tie. "You know how it is." She nodded, though she no longer knew. She hadn't been invited to a client dinner in months. As they walked toward the kitchen, his phone buzzed. Damon glanced at the screen, eyes narrowing with intensity he didn't show her anymore. He typed something quickly, hiding the screen with practiced subtlety. The small gesture sliced at her heart more sharply than raised voices ever could. They ate quietly. The clinking of silverware echoed between them like punctuation marks to a story neither wanted to finish. Damon complimented the food. Amara thanked the chef. They pretended not to notice the growing emptiness between them. When he excused himself to take a call, she didn't follow. She simply sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at the untouched food on her plate as the murmur of his voice seeped faintly through the hallway. She didn't want to listen, but silence makes curiosity louder. Later that week, the storm finally cracked. It was late, So late the house had settled into the kind of quiet that makes clocks sound louder than they are. Amara had been reading in the study, though her eyes skimmed the same sentence over and over. Her thoughts wandered, drifting into memories of Damon as the man who held her hand through sleepless nights, who promised her forever when forever felt fragile. Footsteps approached. Damon's voice followed, lower than usual, taut with frustration. She moved toward the door, not to eavesdrop, but simply to understand the man she was somehow losing. "No, that's not what we agreed," he hissed into the phone. "I said we need to finish this. There are timelines. I can't drag this out." Her hand froze on the doorknob, pulse thudding in her ears. A muffled reply came through the phone, too indistinct to make out, but Damon's response sharpened. "I don't care what she thinks. I need this done." The words struck her like a cold wind through an open window. She stepped back as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. The sentence replayed in her mind, each repetition heavier than the last. When Damon walked into the study moments later, she was seated at the desk, pretending to review a stack of papers. His expression was neutral, unreadable. He kissed her forehead distractedly, then murmured something about being too tired to talk. She watched him walk away, his silhouette disappearing up the stairs, and felt the loneliness settle around her like thick fog. When the house finally slept, Amara remained where she was, surrounded by dim lamplight and the quiet creak of old wood. Her eyes drifted toward the locked drawer in the desk. She hadn't opened it in years. With slow fingers, she retrieved the small brass key from its hiding place beneath a stack of notebooks. The lock clicked open with a soft resistance, like something awakened from long rest. Inside lay the prenup, thin, yellowed at the edges, bound with a paperclip that had rusted ever so slightly. She remembered signing it at a cramped kitchen table where they used mismatched chairs and shared a bowl of cheap noodles. Back then, they saw it as a formality, a safeguard they would never need. She unfolded the document carefully. Damon's signature swept boldly across the bottom, youthful and confident, untouched by wealth or ego. Her own name sat beside it, smaller, neater, filled with hope. She read the clauses slowly, her breath catching at the one Damon insisted on all those years ago, meant to protect her, to honor their promises, to ensure neither could walk away without truth being accounted for. Now that clause felt like a distant echo of the man she once knew. Her hands trembled as she placed the papers back into the drawer. She locked it, slid the key back under the notebooks, and leaned back in the chair with her eyes closed. The house was silent again, yet the quiet no longer comforted her. It pressed against her ribs, urging her to accept what she already sensed. Something inevitable was coming. The next morning, Damon was waiting for her in the sunroom, his face composed but serious. He gestured for her to sit, and her pulse quickened. "Amara," he said softly, "we need to talk." And in that moment, everything she had feared began to solidify, not as rumor, not as intuition, but as the unraveling she could no longer postpone. Damon's voice didn't sound like her husband's anymore. That was the first thing Amara noticed as he stood before her in the sunroom, hands clasped behind his back like a man delivering difficult news to a boardroom, instead of to the woman who had once held his entire heart. His expression was steady, almost rehearsed, and the stillness between them thickened until even the sunlight felt cold against her skin. She tried to breathe normally, but something in his eyes told her this moment had been coming long before he asked her to sit. "I want a divorce," he said, the words dropping with the precision of a gavel. No hesitation, no tremor, just a cold finality that stole the warmth from the room. For a moment, Amara couldn't feel her hands. Her fingers curled instinctively against the cushions, grounding her as the world shifted beneath her feet. Damon didn't sit. He remained standing, pacing slowly along the windows, outlining his decision as if laying out the steps of an acquisition or announcing a corporate restructuring. She recognized the cadence. She'd heard it in board meetings when he had to make tough calls, but never directed at her. I've been thinking about this for a long time, he continued, and I believe it's the right choice for both of us. Her breath caught, both of us. I'm not happy, he said, eyes fixed on the garden beyond the glass. You aren't either, not anymore. The words pricked something in her chest, a mix of disbelief, sorrow, and a rising heat she hadn't expected. She wanted to argue, to tell him he couldn't redefine her feelings for her, but she stayed silent, waiting because she sensed there was more, something heavier. When he finally turned to her, she saw it, the guilt he was trying so hard to hide. There's someone else, he said. A quiet thud echoed in her mind, like a door slamming shut inside her. She stared at him, fighting the instinct to look away to spare herself from seeing him speak the truth she feared. Her name is Leela, Damon added. She works with the restructuring team. A consultant. One of the many who had come in during the hectic months when Damon was rarely home, always in meetings, always stressed, always too tired to talk. Amara nodded once. She didn't trust herself to speak yet. It wasn't planned, he said quickly, rubbing his forehead. It just happened. She let out a soft, humorless laugh. Things don't just happen, Damon. He flinched, and for a second she saw the man she had married, the one who once hated the idea of hurting her. But the moment passed, swallowed by a brittle determination. I've moved on, he said, although the words trembled at the edges. Moved on. The phrase echoed like a stone dropped into deep water, rippling through every memory they had ever built together. Amara felt her pulse in her throat, loud and uneven. She wanted to scream, to demand why he hadn't spoken earlier, why he had let her cling to a life he was already dismantling. But something kept her still. Maybe pride, maybe exhaustion, maybe the last thread of strength she didn't know she still had. What does she want? Amara asked quietly. Damon looked startled. What do you mean? Layla, she said. What does she want from all of this? It was the first time he lost his composure. His shoulders shifted, his gaze faltered. This isn't about what she wants. I'm the one making the choice. But Amara saw through that. She always had. He continued outlining logistics, property division, timelines, lawyers, as if he were discussing a quarterly report. With each sentence, her heart tightened, but her face remained calm. She refused to give him the spectacle of her breaking. By the time he finished, her tea had gone cold. I'll give you space, he said softly, as if offering a mercy he no longer possessed. You don't have to decide anything today. But she had already decided something. She wouldn't leave this marriage as a discarded footnote in Damon's new storyline. Not after everything they had built, together and separately. Not after she had stood beside him through failures the world never saw. He left the room expecting her to crumble. Instead, she remained seated, staring at the rippling shadows on the floor until her breathing steadied again. A quiet storm gathered in her chest. Grief, yes, but also a budding determination that surprised even her. The next days unfolded like a public reckoning. Leela didn't enter their world timidly. She appeared at Damon's side at charity events where they once stood hand in hand. Tabloids splashed her image on front pages with headlines suggesting Amara had been holding Damon back, implying the marriage had been dead long before Leela stepped in. The cruelty was surgical, designed to erode Amara's dignity. Friends called with half-whispers of sympathy. Some avoided her altogether. Invitations vanished. The staff grew more formal, uncertain whether she was still the lady of the house or a guest awaiting departure. One morning, her mother arrived unannounced, carrying the soft scent of shea butter and lavender. She cupped Amara's face gently, searching her daughter's eyes with a grief only a mother could feel. "Baby," she murmured, "don't let this break you." Amara tried to smile, but it felt foreign on her lips. "I'm fine." Her mother sat beside her, taking her hand. "No woman deserves humiliation. Leave with your dignity. Let him see what he lost." The advice was loving, protective. But as her mother spoke, Amara felt a quiet protest rise inside her. Leaving quietly might protect her pride, but it wouldn't protect the truth. It wouldn't honor the woman she had been through every sacrifice, every late night, Every moment she held Damon together when the world tried to tear him down. "I'm not walking away like this," Amara whispered. Her mother studied her with slow understanding. "Then fight wisely." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Amara searched for the lawyer they had used years ago during a contract negotiation. She hadn't spoken to him in ages, but his name lingered in her memory as someone who respected both her intelligence and her integrity. When she met with him the next morning, he listened patiently as she described what Damon had said, how suddenly everything had shifted, how public the unraveling had become. He asked careful questions, offering no judgment. And then, with a quiet calm that made her sit up straighter, he said, "Have you revisited your prenup?" She blinked. "The prenup, it's old. We signed it before we had anything." "That's why it matters," he replied. "You were equals then, no power imbalance. No wealth to muddy intention. And if I recall," he added, adjusting his glasses, "there was a clause Damon insisted on, something about infidelity." Her breath stalled. "He won't mention it," the attorney continued, "because he's forgotten. Men forget the promises they never expect to rely on. Women remember the ones they sign their futures on." Amara felt something warm flicker inside her chest, a spark against the numbness of the past days. It wasn't vindictive, but steady, focused. A reminder that she wasn't powerless, no matter how Damon framed the dissolution of their marriage. She thanked the attorney, promising to return with documents he could review. As she stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, she felt the world tilt ever so slightly, not in collapse, but in alignment. For the first time since Damon said the word divorce, she felt her feet beneath her again. But the headlines didn't relent. Photos of Damon and Leela shopping, laughing, holding hands, flooded every corner of social media. Comment sections tore into Amara, calling her cold, calling her outdated, calling her invisible. The cruelty didn't hurt as much as the realization that Damon allowed it, that he didn't correct a single lie, that he had already rewritten her part in his story. One evening, she saw a clip of Leela giving an interview outside a luxury venue. The young woman tucked her hair behind her ear, smiling coyly into the cameras as she said, "Damon deserves someone who matches his ambition." Amara exhaled slowly, letting the sting wash over her before it receded. She understood now. Leela wasn't just entering Damon's life, she was rewriting Amara out of it. But Amara Harrington would not be erased. The following morning, she retrieved the prenup from the locked drawer in her study. This time, she didn't tremble. She laid each page flat on the desk, reading slowly, absorbing every line with fresh clarity. When her eyes reached the clause Damon insisted upon, the promise he claimed proved he would never stray. She felt a steadiness anchor her spine. The truth was on her side. Not just emotionally, but legally. And Damon, in his rush to move forward, hadn't realized the weight of what he had signed years ago with earnest, unguarded love. As she slipped the papers into a folder and closed the drawer, she felt her grief shift, evolving into resolve. That night, Damon returned home late again. She watched him enter through the foyer, his expression distracted as he typed something into his phone. The man she once knew seemed buried beneath layers of guilt and carelessness, almost unrecognizable. But when he glanced up and met her gaze across the hallway, something flickered, something unsure. "Amara," he said carefully, "we'll need to start discussing terms." She nodded slowly. "Yes," she replied, "we will." He looked relieved, mistaking her composure for surrender. But deep inside, beneath the quiet surface of her calm, a different promise formed, one to protect her story, her dignity, and the truth Damon wanted to bury. Resolved not to be erased, she prepared for the legal fight ahead, unaware that greed and betrayal were already waiting in the courtroom shadows, ready to twist everything she thought she understood about loyalty, justice, and the man she once loved. Amara didn't pack much, just a small suitcase, a coat warm enough for the unpredictable breeze, and the quiet ache she could no longer hide from herself. She left the mansion before dawn, when the estate lights were still glowing and the world felt half asleep. Driving through the empty streets, she realized for the first time how heavy silence could be, how easily it settled into the seams of a life and refused to let go. She didn't look back at the Harrington estate as it disappeared in her rearview mirror. She knew if she did, something inside her might splinter again. The farther she drove, the more the landscape shifted. Glass towers softened into brick buildings, manicured lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks, and polished cars were replaced by old bicycles leaning against faded storefronts. Her childhood neighborhood hadn't changed much. A few new cafes, a fresh coat of paint on the community center, but the bones were the same, simple, imperfect, familiar. For the first time in weeks, she felt her lungs expand fully. She parked near the small corner store where she used to buy penny candies and slipped out of the car as a chill brushed her cheeks. The air smelled like damp pavement and fried dough from the bakery across the street. A breeze rustled the flags strung between lampposts, pulling her into a memory she didn't know she'd missed. When she stepped inside the little apartment she had rented for the week, she exhaled a breath that trembled on its way out. The space was modest, sunlit, and utterly quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't demand strength or explanations, just presence. Her first walk through the neighborhood felt like stepping through old photographs. Mrs. Langston still tended to her overflowing garden, waving as Amara approached. Kids raced each other down the block, their laughter echoing the kind of freedom she once felt every afternoon after school. And at the park bench near the basketball courts, she spotted Maya, her friend from years before, the one who knew her long before she was Mrs. Harrington. Maya looked up in surprise, then burst into a wide smile. "Girl, look at you," she said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "What brings you back home?" "Needed air," Amara answered softly. Maya didn't push. She simply linked their arms and led them toward the old cafe where they used to spend hours dreaming about futures that seemed impossible at the time. Over steaming mugs of mint tea, they talked, first about harmless things, then about the fractures Amara had been carrying in silence. She didn't cry, she didn't have to. Maya heard the pain between her pauses and the exhaustion inside her sighs. "That mansion can make you forget who you are," Maya murmured. "But this place, it remembers you." A warmth traveled up Amara's throat, settling behind her eyes. She blinked it away, grateful for a friend who knew the versions of her Damon had never bothered to understand. Later that afternoon, she walked alone down a street where the pavement was still uneven. Kids were drawing chalk arrows on the ground, their bright colors stretching across the block like a joyful map. She followed the arrows until one of the little girls looked up and grinned. "It leads to the mural," she exclaimed. The mural was new, an explosion of colors across the side of a once-abandoned building. It depicted women of all ages and shades standing together, holding threads that connected them. Amara stood before it, studying the painted hands, the textured strokes, the sense of unity embedded within every shade of color. She realized then how far she had drifted from herself, how easily a person can disappear when they're trying too hard to keep someone else whole. That night, she cooked for herself, simple food she hadn't made in years. The smell of garlic filled the tiny kitchen. She sat on the floor with her knees drawn up, letting the quiet wrap around her like a blanket. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the closest she had felt in a long time. Morning arrived with a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, an old friend from her university days, Marcus, stood there holding a box of pastries. He worked at one of Damon's partner firms, part of the corporate machine she had once lived at the edges of. "I heard you were back," he said, stepping inside. "Thought you might want company." They sat at the small table, crumbs falling between their coffee mugs as Marcus hesitated before asking, "Is it true what they're saying about the divorce?" "It's true," she whispered. Marcus sighed. "I'm sorry, Damon, he's not the man he used to be." Amara looked up, startled by the certainty in his tone. "What do you mean?" Marcus rubbed his thumb along the edge of his mug, thinking. "There's been talk," he said carefully, "about Leela." Her stomach tightened. She's not just a consultant, Marcus continued. Damon's been giving her way more influence than anyone expected. She's been pushing decisions, some of them risky. Investors don't trust her, but Damon, he shook his head. He's too deep in it. How deep? Amara asked. Deep enough that his judgment is slipping. She's got sway, Amara. Real sway, the kind that doesn't come from talent. The words settled heavily in the room, thickening the air around her. It wasn't jealousy that rose inside her. It was alarm. Damon, blinded by infatuation, handing pieces of the empire they built to someone who hadn't earned it. Someone already weaving herself into his power. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because you deserve the truth," Marcus said, "no matter where this goes." The vulnerability of that moment caught her off guard. She felt the sting of betrayal again, sharper now, but beneath it was something steadier, clarity. Leela wasn't just replacing her in Damon's personal life. She was positioning herself at the center of his professional world. And if investors were starting to notice, then Damon's desperation to finalize the divorce wasn't about peace. It was about control. After Marcus left, Amara sat for a long time staring at the wall, her fingers tapping rhythmically against her knee. A new dimension to the betrayal unfolded before her, not just emotional but strategic. Damon wasn't trying to separate from her as a partner. He was trying to erase her as a witness. As evening fell, she pulled the prenup from her suitcase. She had brought it without knowing why. But now, as she spread the pages across the bed, she felt the shape of a truth she hadn't fully grasped before. Her eyes returned to the clause Damon had insisted on in those early days when love made him eager to protect her future. A clause that spoke directly to infidelity and its consequences. The language was clear, binding, unavoidable. Her hand moved across the page, tracing the signature Damon had once placed with confidence and sincerity. She could almost hear his voice from that distant night. "I want you safe, no matter what happens." He had kept his word without meaning to. In trying to discard her, he'd forgotten he once vowed never to let her walk away powerless. For the first time since the divorce was mentioned, Amara felt the weight in her chest shift. No longer a stone, but something alive, pushing back, demanding air. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking truth, integrity, the dignity she had earned through years of sacrifice. The next day, she wandered back to the community center, drawn by the lively music drifting from inside. Children were painting cardboard shields and crowns, turning the gym into a makeshift kingdom. A little girl tugged at Amara's sleeve, offering her a brush. "Paint with us." Amara knelt beside her, dipping the brush into gold paint. As she moved it across the cardboard, the child beamed up at her. "You're good at this," the girl said. "You look like a queen." The words, simple and innocent, touched something tender inside her. She blinked, then smiled, a genuine, unexpected smile that surprised even her. Walking out into the sunlight afterward, she felt taller somehow. Straighter, rooted, her phone buzzed. A message from her attorney: "Whenever you're ready, bring the document." "We'll move forward." She looked down at the cracked sidewalk beneath her feet, remembering the girl she had been here, the dreamer, the believer, the fighter. The one who had built a life alongside Damon, not beneath him. "I'm ready," she whispered. By the time she returned to her apartment, the sky was streaked with orange and lavender, stretching toward a horizon that looked wider than it had days ago. She packed her suitcase quietly, folding clothing with a calm steadiness. She wasn't returning to the mansion as a wounded wife. She was returning as a woman who finally knew her worth again. As she reached for the doorknob, she paused, glancing once more around the small apartment that had held her through the worst of her unraveling. Then she stepped out into the hallway, her resolve settling with the weight of truth she now carried. She was ready to step back into Damon's world, ready to reveal what he hoped would stay buried. Ready to fight, not out of vengeance, but out of the clarity and strength she had reclaimed on the very streets that raised her. The cameras were already waiting when Amara stepped out of the car, their shutters clicking like distant thunder. She kept her gaze steady, Her chin lifted just enough to signal she wasn't here as a victim. Still, her heartbeat thudded unevenly beneath her coat, a rhythm betraying the storm inside her. She walked toward the courthouse doors, each step echoing through a hallway of reporters who whispered her name as though it belonged to a ghost. Inside, the air was colder than she expected. Polished floors reflected the low hum of voices, and the scent of old paper and coffee drifted through the corridors. She paused only once, placing her hand briefly against the marble wall to steady herself. She wasn't afraid. She reminded herself of that. But it had been a long time since she'd stood in a room where the world expected her to fall apart. Damon arrived minutes later, wearing the confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been secured. His suit was sharp, his hair perfectly styled, and beside him walked Leela, her expression a careful blend of sympathy and innocence. She clung to Damon's arm just tightly enough to claim him, but lightly enough to seem fragile. The cameras loved her for it. Damon didn't look at Amara immediately. He gave reporters a small nod, whispered something to Leela that made her smile softly, then turned to meet Amara's eyes with a cool, businesslike stare. "Let's keep this civil," he said. "Civility," she murmured, "depends on truth." He blinked, then forced a polite smile, the kind meant to end conversations, not start them. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. People leaned forward as though attending a show rather than a hearing that dissected a broken marriage. Amara felt their stares, but she didn't let them touch her. She walked to her seat with quiet grace, folding her hands in her lap as Damon and Leela settled across the aisle. When the judge entered, the room stilled. Wooden benches creaked as everyone straightened. Damon's lawyer rose first, an older man with a voice that rolled like gravel, polished by years of courtroom theatrics. "Your Honor," he began, "my client enters this process with transparency and good faith. He has been the primary financial driver of the marriage, supporting Mrs. Harrington generously throughout their union. Unfortunately, emotional disconnect and a lack of mutual support have led to an irreparable breakdown." Amara watched Damon as the words spilled out. He didn't look proud. He didn't look guilty either. He looked like a man determined to complete a task. The attorney continued, "Mrs. Harrington has shown little interest in the responsibilities that come with maintaining their public and professional partnership. She has distanced herself from events, failed to uphold expectations, and contributed little to the growth of Mr. Harrington's enterprise. Therefore—" "That's not true," Amara said quietly. Her attorney placed a steadying hand on her arm, reminding her they would have their moment. But those 4 words still hung in the air like a crack of lightning, and for a split second, even Damon's lawyer faltered. He regained his composure and pressed on, painting Amara as a passive presence who drifted through their marriage without purpose, someone unfit to remain tethered to Damon's future. The more he spoke, the more the narrative twisted into something unrecognizable. Not a broken relationship, a failed contribution, a burden. Amara's breath tightened, but her posture never wavered. Then came the moment that shifted the temperature of the room. "Your Honor," Damon's lawyer said, gesturing toward Leela, "we call Ms. Leela Green to the stand." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Leela walked forward with deliberate fragility, smoothing her pale dress as she took her seat. She tucked her hair behind her ear, glanced shyly at Damon, then lowered her gaze as though weighed by the responsibility of her own words. "Ms. Green," the attorney began, "can you describe your relationship with Mr. Harrington?" She nodded slowly. We became close during a difficult period for him." Her voice trembled just enough to draw sympathetic looks from the crowd. "He confided in me," she continued. "He was lonely, hurt, Mrs. Harrington was present. She didn't support him emotionally the way a spouse should." Amara felt something cold settle beneath her ribs, not anger exactly, something quieter, heavier. "And you provided that support?" the attorney asked. "I tried," Leela whispered. "I never wanted to come between them." But Damon was already unhappy. The marriage was dead long before I arrived. The judge nodded, taking notes. The clerk typed steadily. A murmur moved across the courtroom like a gust of wind. From his seat, Damon watched Leela's performance with softened features. His shoulders lowered, his expression warmed. For a moment, it looked like he believed every word she said, as though her version had overwritten his memory. Amara felt her pulse pounding in her ears. She glanced at her attorney, who gave a faint nod, reminding her that the truth, when spoken at the right moment, did not need to shout. When the judge asked if the defense had any documents to present, Damon's lawyer spread a thick stack across the table, records of expenditures, attendance lists from charity galas, emails twisted to appear neglectful. Each page sought to diminish Amara's presence, turning her into a shadow beside the empire she had helped Damon build. The judge flipped through them, leaning back as if the decision were already forming. It was then that Amara rose, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that drew every gaze to her at once. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I have a document to submit." Damon's head snapped toward her, confusion flickering across his face. "What document?" he demanded under his breath. She didn't answer him. She stepped forward, unfolding a single envelope she had guarded with near reverence. Her attorney accepted it, handing it to the judge with a solemn nod. "This," he explained, "is the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties at the start of the marriage." Damon's expression shifted from annoyance to recognition, then something darker. Leela's fingers gripped her skirt. The judge skimmed the document, eyebrows lifting as he reached the middle. "Mr. Harrington," he said slowly, "did you sign this agreement?" Damon swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "Did you read the clause regarding marital fidelity?" Damon's lips parted, but no sound emerged. The judge read aloud, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "In the event that Mr. Harrington engages in extramarital relations, he forfeits the right to dissolve the marriage without equitable restitution to Mrs. Harrington, including but not limited to the division of assets accumulated throughout the union." The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, a rustle of bodies leaning forward to see Damon's reaction. Cameras clicked furiously from the back row. Leela's composed facade crumbled into visible panic. Amara didn't move. She kept her gaze fixed on the judge, her posture unwavering as the truth settled into the room like a struck bell. Damon stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said, voice tight. "That was years ago. I didn't think we didn't have anything then." "But you signed it," the judge reminded him calmly. Leela rose halfway from her seat. "Your Honor, this is unfair. Damon never meant—" "Ms. Green," the judge cut in sharply, "you may sit down." She sank back into her chair, face pale. Damon's lawyer scrambled for footing. "Your Honor, surely this clause is outdated. The circumstances have changed significantly. We request—" "The clause is clear," the judge said, closing the folder with finality, "and legally binding." Damon's shoulders sagged, the confident posture he carried into the room dissolving under the weight of a promise he never imagined would return. Leela stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, as though the foundation she had been building on had suddenly turned to dust. Amara felt no triumph, only the steady return of air to her lungs. The judge tapped his pen against the desk. "Given this new information, I am calling a recess. Both parties will reconvene after I have reviewed the terms in full." People scrambled to leave the courtroom, eager to spread the story. Reporters whispered eagerly, attorneys looked on with renewed interest, and spectators watched Amara with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Damon approached her slowly, anger and fear warring behind his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me you still had that?" he hissed. "Because," she said softly, "you never asked what I held on to." Leela rushed to him. "Damon, do something, fix this." But he didn't move. He stood there, caught between the woman he had betrayed and the woman he had chosen, realizing too late that integrity, once abandoned, demands a high price. Amara stepped past them, her coat brushing lightly against her side as she headed toward the hallway. Her attorney joined her, whispering something calm and reassuring, but she barely heard him. The only sound that mattered was the echo of her own footsteps, steady, grounded, resolute. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with commotion. Flashes from cameras lit the air like tiny bursts of lightning. Microphones reached toward her, voices overlapping with urgent questions. "Mrs. Harrington, did you know about the affair? Is the clause enforceable? What happens now?" She offered no answer. She simply walked forward, carving a path through the frenzy with quiet strength. The storm had broken, but the reckoning had only just begun. As she reached the far end of the hall, she allowed herself one breath, deep, anchoring, filled with the weight of truth finally spoken. A breath that carried her into the next battle, the next confrontation, the next unraveling of lies. Behind her, Damon and Leela struggled under the collapse of the narrative they thought they controlled. Ahead of her waited consequences no one in that courtroom had fully grasped yet. The judge was only beginning his review, and Amara, she was only beginning to rise. Damon found her before she even made it halfway down the hallway. He didn't call her name, he didn't have to. The sharp echo of his footsteps, the raggedness in his breathing, the barely restrained panic rolling off him in waves. She felt all of it before he appeared at her side. He reached out as if to grab her arm, then thought better of it, his hand hanging awkwardly in the space between them. "Why didn't you tell me you still had that?" he demanded, voice low and frayed. His polished confidence from earlier had cracked, leaving something raw and unfamiliar in its place. "You could have warned me, Amara. You blindsided me in there." She turned slowly to face him. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows across his features, revealing just how shaken he really was. "Warn you?" she repeated, her voice soft but steady. "You decided this divorce. You decided how quickly it needed to be done. You decided what story to tell. Why would you expect me to protect you from your own choices?" Damon opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he had no argument prepared. "It wasn't about winning," she continued. "It was about truth, about dignity, about not letting you rewrite the past as if I never mattered." He flinched, the words hitting harder than he wanted to admit. "I didn't rewrite anything." "You let other people do it," she said, "and then you pretended not to notice." For a moment, the only sound was the faint rustle of papers from a nearby clerk. Damon lifted a hand to his forehead, pressing his palm against his temple as though trying to hold his world together. "I didn't think you'd use something like that against me," he whispered. She shook her head. "I didn't use it against you. I used it to defend myself." Before Damon could respond, a sharp, frantic voice echoed down the corridor. Damon, please do something." Leela rushed toward them, heels clicking desperately against the polished floor. Her eyes were wide, mascara smudged at the corners from barely blinked tears. She reached for Damon's arm, clinging to him as though she were drowning. "This can't happen," she cried. "They're all talking, Damon. Do you hear them? They're saying you lied. They're saying I'm the reason." "Leela," Damon muttered, trying to keep his voice measured, "calm down. Calm down." She echoed, her voice cracking. "Everything we planned is falling apart. You told me this divorce would be clean. You told me she wouldn't fight." Amara watched the two of them silently. Leela's desperation didn't sting, it clarified. She saw now, plainly and painfully, that Leela had never loved Damon. She loved the proximity to his power, the shine of his name, the life he represented. And Damon, blinded by the validation, had handed her pieces of himself he never realized she wasn't equipped to hold. "You promised me," Leela insisted, jabbing a trembling finger at him. "You said you'd take care of it." Damon's jaw tightened. "Leela, this isn't helping. It's not helping because you're letting her win," she burst out. Her gaze snapped toward Amara, sharp and accusing. "You're doing this to ruin us." Amara's brows lifted slightly. "I didn't ruin anything," she said quietly. "The truth did." Leela took a step forward, pointing at Amara as though she were a threat. "You think you're better than me because you got him first. Because you had the ring, Damon chose me, not you." Something inside Damon finally snapped. He pulled his arm from Leela's grip. "Stop," he said sharply. "Just stop." Leela froze, eyes wide with disbelief. Damon didn't raise his voice often, and certainly never at her. He ran a hand through his hair, shoulders sagging. Do you hear yourself? This isn't about choosing. This is about what I did, what I broke. The confession hung in the air like a fragile truth finally exposed to daylight. Leela stepped back as though he'd struck her. So that's it, you're taking her side. I'm acknowledging reality, he said. Something I should have done months ago. Leela's face twisted, not with heartbreak, but with fury. You can't walk away from me. I won't let you. Damon stared at her for a long, exhausted moment. You were never meant to hold my future, he said softly. I just didn't want to admit it. Leela's breath hitched, and she spun away, heels clicking sharply as she fled down the corridor, sobs echoing behind her. The sound faded slowly, swallowed by the courthouse's stone walls. Damon didn't watch her go. He stood there, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor as though finally understanding the depth of the damage he had caused, not just to Amara, but to himself. Amara murmured, "You chased someone who only saw the surface of you." He looked up, eyes tired. "And you saw everything." The ache in his voice would have shattered her months ago. Now it barely stirred the surface of her resolve. "Damon," she said gently, "I can't be responsible for what you learn from this." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing a truth he could no longer outrun. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Reporters whispered eagerly. Spectators leaned in. Damon kept his distance from Amara, not out of anger, but out of a dawning humility that made him seem smaller, more human. The judge called the room to order, glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed the prenup with meticulous attention. The silence stretched long enough for hearts to race. Finally, he looked up. "Given the clarity and validity of this agreement," he said, "the court rules in favor of Mrs. Harrington. She is entitled to half of all marital assets in accordance with the infidelity clause signed by Mr. Harrington." A murmur erupted through the courtroom, a wave of sound washing over every person present. The judge continued, "Furthermore, an official acknowledgement of breach will be recorded as required by the contract." Damon closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the impact. When he opened them again, they flickered toward Amara, not with anger but with painful acceptance. The judge asked if Amara wished to make any additional claims. She rose slowly, feeling dozens of eyes follow her. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispering, "You have leverage for more if you want it." But she shook her head. Facing the judge, she said, "Your Honor, I accept the court's ruling. I do not seek anything beyond what is stated. No alimony, no extended claims, no continued entanglements." The courtroom shifted again, this time with shock. Even Damon's lawyer stared at her, baffled. "Mrs. Harrington, are you certain?" Amara nodded. "Yes, I want peace, nothing more." The simplicity of her words struck Damon harder than any legal consequence. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, eyes shining with something close to regret. The judge made his final notes. "Very well. The settlement will reflect Mrs. Harrington's request." When the gavel struck, the sound rippled through the room like a final heartbeat sealing the end of an era. The hearing adjourned. People rose from their seats in a flurry of movement, but Amara remained still for a moment, absorbing the quiet inside herself. She felt neither triumph nor loss, just release. A weight she had carried for far too long finally loosened its grip. As she gathered her things, Damon approached her. His voice was soft, almost fragile. "Why did you let me go so easily?" She met his gaze steadily. "Because holding you would have kept me from holding myself." He blinked, emotions swirling behind his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "I didn't offer it," she said gently. "But I'm not carrying your burden anymore." He inhaled shakily. "I'm sorry, Amara." She gave a small, genuine nod. "I hope you mean that for yourself, too." The words seemed to cut deeper than reproach. He stepped back, unable to hide the grief overtaking his expression. A grief born not of losing her, but of finally seeing what he'd thrown away. Amara turned toward the exit, the courtroom doors opening before her like a threshold into a life unshackled. Reporters surged toward her again, but she walked past them with quiet assurance, the noise fading behind her like distant thunder. Outside, the air felt different, crisp, expansive, almost forgiving. She lifted her face to the faint warmth of the afternoon light, letting it wash over her. She didn't know exactly where she was going next, but she knew she was going forward, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. With the legal battle behind her and her future untangled from Damon's shadow, she stepped into the next chapter with a calm, powerful certainty. Something new was waiting, and she was finally ready to walk toward it. The first morning after the divorce paperwork was finalized felt strangely weightless, as if Amara had stepped into a world where gravity didn't cling so tightly to her bones. She woke before the sun, the city still wrapped in its quiet blue haze, and for a moment she lay there listening to her own breath, steady, unhurried, unburdened. It stunned her. Peace had a sound, and somehow she had forgotten it, but peace wasn't the same as stillness. Something inside her began to stir, a small pulse of purpose that had been smothered under years of performing a role she no longer recognized. She felt it again a week later as she walked through her old neighborhood, watching girls waiting at a bus stop with sketchbooks tucked under their arms. She heard it in the laughter spilling out of the community center when she passed by, a building she herself had once relied on as a teenager trying to find her place. She paused at the steps, running her fingertips along the chipped paint of the railing. The place looked tired but alive, like a heart that had weathered storms and continued beating anyway. The whisper of purpose grew louder. By the end of the month, she was meeting with contractors, architects, and local artists who remembered her from childhood. They didn't treat her like a billionaire's ex-wife. They treated her like Amara, the girl who once spent entire afternoons painting murals that stretched across the cracked brick. The girl who donated her allowance to buy new brushes when the center's supplies ran out. The girl with dreams bigger than her neighborhood had room for. Why come back here? One of the volunteers asked her during a planning meeting. Amara smiled softly. Because this place saved me before, she said. I want it to save someone else now. And so the work began. Day after day, crews ripped away broken boards, scrubbed walls, and wired new light fixtures that bathed the rooms in warm, hopeful brightness. Local artists painted enormous, vibrant panels, portraits of women lifting each other up, hands reaching, colors blooming outward like sparks. The scent of fresh paint clung to the air, mingling with the sound of hammers and laughter and the occasional music someone played on a portable speaker. Amara was there for all of it. She cleaned floors, hauled boxes, stayed late organizing supplies. People told her she didn't need to do the physical work, that with her settlement money she could hire more staff, delegate everything, keep her hands clean. But she didn't want clean hands. She wanted to feel the world again. One afternoon, while sorting donated notebooks, she overheard two girls whispering near the doorway. "That's her," one murmured. "The lady who bought the whole place." "She looks normal," the other whispered back as if disappointed. Amara laughed quietly to herself. Normal was a blessing these days. When the renovations were finally complete, they held an opening celebration. Flyers spread across the neighborhood, and word of mouth carried the news even farther. People streamed in, children rushing to the art tables, teenagers heading toward the digital studio, mothers exploring the reading corner. The building buzzed with energy, a heartbeat she felt in the soles of her feet. She stood near the welcome banner, greeting everyone with the ease of someone who belonged again. Then from the corner of her eye, she sensed a shift in the crowd, an unfamiliar stillness in a room full of motion. She glanced toward the back and her breath softened. Damon. He stood half-hidden near the exit, dressed in a simple coat, hands in his pockets as if trying to disappear into the wall. He didn't approach her. He didn't smile. He just watched. For a moment, Amara felt her pulse stumble, not with longing, but with the quiet pang of history resurfacing like a soft tide. Damon looked different, tired, older somehow. The polish that once shielded him had dulled, revealing a man stripped of illusion. Leela was nowhere in sight. Rumor had already drifted through the city that their relationship faded not long after the scandal. Investors had pulled back, publications criticized his instability, and he found himself rebuilding on unstable ground. But none of that mattered here. Here, he was simply a man watching a woman he once underestimated blossom into someone he no longer recognized. A group of girls rushed toward Amara, pulling her into a conversation about the new dance room. She listened with full attention, but she felt Damon's gaze linger like a quiet apology carried on the air. She didn't acknowledge him, not out of cruelty, but because closure, she realized, didn't always require confrontation. Sometimes closure was simply choosing not to turn toward the past when the future was finally within reach. Eventually, Damon slipped out of the building unnoticed. She only knew he had gone because the air in the room lightened again, like a weight had lifted without protest. She exhaled, pressing a hand gently to her heart, not to soothe pain, but to marvel at how unbroken it felt. Later, when the sun dipped low and cast golden beams across the polished floors, Amara stepped outside. The mural on the exterior wall glowed in the evening light, each color burning richer as the sky deepened. Children's chalk drawings covered the pavement, messy and imperfect, but filled with joy. She walked a slow circuit around the building, letting the hum of conversation spill out from the open windows. A girl leaned over the sill and waved at her. Amara waved back, smiling as the breeze brushed her hair. A soft thought entered her mind, steady and warm. This is what freedom feels like. Not the kind that comes from winning a battle, but the kind that comes after choosing yourself without needing anyone else's permission. She sat on the steps, watching the last sliver of sun slide beneath the horizon. The world around her buzzed with life, yet her heart felt still in the most comforting way, a stillness that wasn't emptiness but completion. If someone had told her a year ago that she would lose her marriage and find herself in the same breath, she wouldn't have believed them. Pain had carved her open, yes, but now light filled the spaces where sorrow once lived. She felt gratitude not for the heartbreak itself, but for the way it forced her to return to the woman she once was, the woman she could become again. Behind her, the community center pulsed with laughter and conversation, a living testament to her resilience. Children were painting, mothers were talking, music drifted from the multi-purpose room. It was a sanctuary, it was a beginning, and it was hers. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the cool air wrap around her like a whisper of promise. Tomorrow she would host the first empowerment workshop. Next week the dance program would begin. Soon she would hire instructors, expand the studio, build partnerships. The future stretched wide and full before her, inviting, uncertain but undeniably hers to shape. She rose from the steps slowly, taking one last look at the glowing mural. Then she whispered, "Thank you," not to Damon, not to Leela, not even to fate, but to the journey that carried her here, to the storms that hardened her, to the cracks that let her light spill through. As she turned back toward the building, the sound of her footsteps merged with the rhythm of the bustling center. It felt like stepping in time with her own rebirth. The night settled gently over the neighborhood, and Amara stepped into it with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her purpose, and most importantly, herself. A new chapter awaited, and she was finally ready to write it.